Howdy everyone and welcome to the Serial Geek TV YouTube channel. My name is James Eatock and today I present to you something special. Back in 2003 to 2006, I was a co-producer on the UK He-Man and the Masters of the Universe DVDs produced by Contender and Cheerful Scout. For one of the special features, I conducted an interview with Filmation storyboard artist and writer Robert Lamb. Well over 1.5 hours worth of footage was shot, but for the DVD I edited the interview down to roughly 40 minutes. A while back I mused that showing Rob's interview in all its glory with new accompanying visuals would be a rather wonderful addition to this channel. Fans of animation and the history of Filmation will love this, given that Rob thoroughly enjoyed his time at Filmation and had much to say. This is the 5th part of the interview recorded back in 2004. Enjoy!
After She-Ra, I went back to the storyboard department. I think I had bothered Arthur too many times about insignificant things in his mind. I was getting a little frustrated because I was doing more script doctoring than writing original stories. And so after half a season of He-Man and a full season of She-Ra, I went back to the storyboard department and went back to boarding and coordinating production there. About the time that I went back to storyboard, Bob Forward moved from storyboard into writing and wrote some of the best stuff. Because I had reached that wall, Bob Forward, who was a good writer in his own right, pitched a couple of story ideas and had sold a couple of freelance scripts. And when I left the story department, or the writing department, Bob moved up and filled that in, and he wrote some of the best scripts of either series. And it was a joy to work on a Bob Forward script. The question arises is, in case of myself and Bob Forward, was the storyboarding experience an advantage as a writer? And I think it boils down to this. Whether you're a writer or a storyboard artist, the primary thing you're doing is telling a story. You are a storyteller. I am a storyteller. Now, whether I'm telling a story vocally, like I'm doing now, with the occasional stutter, or frequent stutter, or whether I'm doing it on a typewriter then, or word processor now, writing a script with words, or whether I'm telling a story using a storyboard, drawing pictures or a comic book or what have you, it is still communicating ideas sequentially and telling a story. And certainly having the experience of interpreting other people's stories and making them work, having that real hands-on understanding of production really is an advantage in writing for animation. It's possible for people to write for animation who do not have animation experience, but for those who do, not everybody who animates can write scripts or even storyboard artists can write scripts. But someone who can combine the abilities and experiences of both, you can get some very fine results. Not every one of my scripts were what I wish they would have been. Sometimes it was because of conflicts with the powers that be. Other times you sometimes have a bad story, or a story that just doesn't work quite right. Not everything you do is perfect. But I am very pleased and proud of a number of the ones I did. And it was a great joy to be able to contribute not only in the storyboard department, but actually to originate some stories for He-Man and She-Ra. And I remember there was this, when I first started at Filmation back in '81, I remember talking with one of the writers. He was an older guy by the name of Bill Danch. And I think I was complaining, I was 25 years old, and I was complaining about the lameness of a particular scene. And he was this crusty old curmudgeon, and he looked at me and he goes, yeah, I hear that all the time. Where were you when the page was blank? And I remember that because it's a lot easier to criticize something that is finished, that exists, than it is to come up with something out of thin air. And it was a little bit different when I went from the storyboard department to the writing department in storyboard. I had a script. Some things worked, some things didn't work. I go, this is so lame. This is so bad. I've got to make this work somehow. It's a lot different when you're sitting there in a room by yourself, staring at a blank piece of paper and a typewriter, trying to think of how this is all going to work. You know what if you have a story to begin with, you're halfway home. What's really hard is sitting there saying, okay, I need to have a story. What do I do now? What can I have He-Man do today? And sometimes the ideas come quickly. Sometimes the blank paper just stares at you. So it's a whole other thing to originate ideas and originate stories than it is to interpret stories in storyboard. In the old days of animation, back in the early Disney days, the story artist was the writer, and they would come up with ideas and sequences, and they would write the script in storyboard panels, pin them up on the wall. Hence the term storyboard, and that was how they would create the story. Well, in television and pretty much in features now, it's done in script first and storyboard second. The best things, I think, come from a collaboration of both disciplines. There needs to be that literary understanding of character development and story arcs and action and dialogue and all that, but there's also got to be an understanding of how to stage things visually and what works and what doesn't work, and how do you tell the story in the most compelling way. Some of the storyboard artists went on to direct. Tom Tataranowicz, who we, because of his long name, we call Tom T, went on to direct, as did Tom Cito. And that came out, their going into directing was the same thinking that drove me into writing, is need to get into a higher level of control to make this stuff better. And Tom T was a bit of a maverick. He was always, pulling things and trying to get things by. He'd slip in, he was much of a prankster. He'd slip things into our dailies. He'd have shots of He-Man and Frosta in one of the She-Ra episodes that was highly suggestive when shot in a particular way. And that scene was modified to make it less suggestive, but it got big howls in the screening room. And Lou Scheier goes, "What are you trying to do to us?" And he loved to pull pranks, and he directed some of the finest episodes of Filmation product once he moved over there, and as did Tom Cito. And directing animation is different than directing live action, and I didn't quite have the animation chops to make that transition into directing, because you had to know how to time sheets and direct animators on how to get what they wanted. The closest I could get to that was boarding and putting visual ideas on paper. But animation direction is a bit more complex. One of my favorite episodes in She-Ra Princess of Power is Looky Lends a Hand. This was an interesting thing in that there was this device in the She-Ra series, a character called Looky, who we stuck somewhere in the episode in the background. And then at the end of the show, Looky would come on and say, "Did you see me today?" And then they'd put the scene back up, and he would come out and wave, "Hi, here I am." And some of us liked it, some of us hated it. But I remember that when I was trying to pitch a story, Arthur wasn't accepting any of my ideas, and I said, "How about?" He said, "How about something with Lookie?" And I went, "Oh no, not that, please, not that." But I said, "Sure, I'll think of something." And so I was thinking through how to integrate him into the story. Well, he's always hiding and so on, and for him to come out of the story, maybe something had happened that he would need to help out with. Also, we needed another crossover show. We had done a number of shows in which He-Man would come to Etheria, and we hadn't had a crossover show in a number of scripts, and it was time for another one. And so I thought, okay, so as I was talking the idea out with Arthur, I said, how about Hordak and his guys come with something that traps our heroes, and Lookie is the only one who could help, and Lighthope sends him to get He-Man to come rescue them. And oh, that's good, go ahead and write it. So I sat down and I thought about it, and always thinking on how to save a buck, I thought, wouldn't it be fun if they had some sort of device that stopped time, and we could have held cells with no movement? Ultimate cheap way out. And the idea tickled me, and I thought, oh, I bet we could do this. And so I wrote that Hordak had gotten this new device from the Horde catalog called the Time Stop, and that it would stop time in a limited area. And if they could sneak it into the rebel camp, they would freeze them, and then they could stop them from interfering with the Horde and maybe capture them or something. So I wrote the script and decided we'd have this animation stopped, and then Lookie would go get He-Man. Well, that script just turned out to be an absolute joy. Had some funny gags with Mantenna and Hordak, and at the end of Act 1, boom, the device goes off in the rebel camp, and everybody freezes. And we used to we made jokes in looking when we were looking at the rough cut of it, and said, "How'd you get them to stand so still?" Which in live action, whenever they do a freeze, often, and someone else is walking around, often the actors have to hold very, very still, and everybody watches to see if they blink or breathe or something. And so there were those kinds of gags going on during the viewing of the rough cut. Well, I decided that the device had gone haywire, and the influence of this time stop device was expanding beyond the Whispering Woods and affecting a lot of things. And so at the beginning of Act 2, Lookie is walking around, where am I going to hide today? Which we'd never seen before. And then he goes and he notices something's very odd. The animals aren't moving. There are leaves blowing in the air, and the leaves are kind of stuck there. And this is really odd. And then he comes across different characters. To make a long story short, he ends up going to Lighthope, who's having troubles. The effect is happening to them, but he is a creature of magic, so he's not being affected. And Lighthope sends Lookie through the dimensional barrier to Eternia to go get He-Man. Well, Lighthope is being affected by the increasing influence of the time stop device and cannot fully get him to the Royal Palace, and he just struggles. I gotta get Lookie somewhere in Eternia, and boom. And where does he show up? He shows up at Snake Mountain with Skeletor. And you know, after working with Hordak and the Horde, it was a joy to revisit Skeletor and have fun with him. And so I played some slapstick gags where Skeletor is once again about to do this scheme in order to take over Eternia, and just when he's about to apply this little device, this crystal that's going to do it, Loki pops out of the sky and ruins the plan, and Skeletor takes it out on Beastman, thinking it's one of his creatures. And anyway, he ends up getting to Prince Adam, and He-Man through the sorceress goes and rescues She-Ra and the others, and they use their sword and the power of the sword to combat. As long as they hold onto their sword, that was the gimmick, they could resist the effects of the time stop device. And that's how He-Man frees Adora and she becomes She-Ra, and the two of them have to pull this thing that's stuck in time, and this shows what great power they are. And She-Ra turns her sword to a chain, they wrap it around the time stop device, and they start pulling it. And emphasizing that it requires superhuman strength to move something that's stuck in time. And so it's a great effort. They don't just knock it, they pull it out of the area, and end up joining forces to damage the device, and things stop. And I think they end up kicking it out of the area. It lands in the fright zone. Mantenna says, "I think I can fix it," and it goes haywire and ends up being the joke's back on Hordak. That was a fun show to do. I got to bring back Skeletor, I got to bring back He-Man, and I got to show some real struggle and power. And actually, the Loki character was fun to work with. After I had gone back to the storyboard department, I got a phone call from Lou Scheimer in Bob Arkwright's office. And we were on our afternoon break, and he had just seen the rough cut before he called me down to see it. And he really, really liked it. And the thing was that I was getting a whole lot of flack from Mike Swanigan and Victor Kelly and Warren Greenwood, Steve Hickner, and Don Manuel. All the guys were in there because Lou was just pouring out this praise of how wonderful the show was, and what a brilliant idea about having no animation in parts of it as a story device, and this and this. And I'm saying, well, thank you very much, Lou. I'm glad you liked it. And the guys are just giving me all kinds of misery over kissing up to the boss and all this other stuff. But it truly was one of the most enjoyable episodes to write, and it also came through to the final product. Much of what I envisioned made it to the screen, and that was very, very satisfying. I can't say that happened with every script. When I wrote Micah of Bright Moon and brought back Glimmer's father, it was a very poignant and touching story, but Arthur wouldn't allow me to have him stay. And I fought. He's got to stay. And so we had to write this contrived ending where Mike, the king of Bright Moon, escapes from the Horde's prison planet, and he makes it all the way to his wife and daughter. And shortly after we get through this initial conflict and resolve it, he's going to leave again and fight the Horde in other parts of the planet. And I was really disgusted with that, because he should have stayed. He should have stayed. He didn't have to be a prominent character, but he should have stayed. And this was the kind of story arguments to get into. Now, Arthur felt that if he stayed, then what about the episodes when he's not there? Because the episodes were not shown in sequence. They were not shown in order. And once they got into reruns, they were showing up in any kind of order. And no matter how I argued, I couldn't convince him to do otherwise. And that was very disappointing, and I heard lots of complaints about it after the fact from both co-workers and fans, but there was nothing I could do. It also features one of the worst things ever to do with Shira's sword. I wanted to revisit elements from The Secret of the Sword, the origin episodes where Angela was fighting the Harpy, and suddenly, I guess because we were getting a lot of comments back from parent and teacher groups about violence in animation and this being toy commercials and so on, they were hypersensitive to too much violence and anything that looked threatening. And I had this one sequence where Shira was fighting the Harpies, and we did, sword to this weapon, sword to that weapon, and everything got nixed. And I was getting really disgusted. I said, "What do you want?" And so I wrote in sword to blanket, and the blanket covers the Harpy, and the Harpy falls. And that was exceedingly lame, and I expected it to be, say, "Come on, now you're being ridiculous." I was trying to use reverse psychology, and he accepted it. My fault, sword to blanket. I apologize. I hated it when I wrote it. I hated it when I saw it. And I apologize to the community, the fan community, for sword to blanket in Micah Brightman. That was very bad.
To be continued.